What do nerdy roller coaster enthusiasts do when they are bored on a Sunday afternoon and in desperate need of more credits? Well, they build a roller coaster themselves to pad their credit count. All jokes aside, roller coaster enthusiasts are some of the most creative people on the planet. That and dads just trying to entertain their kids. Some of these engineers are actually amazing at putting stuff together, and from that we get a category of coasters called backyard coasters. Besides being one of the most clickable topics on the internet for roller coasters and being wildly popular with the GP, backyard roller coasters are some of the coolest feats of engineering on the planet. So in today's video, we're going to take a look at people's individual marvels and talk about some of the best backyard coasters on the planet. We're going to look at 10 specific coasters. By the off chance that you built a coaster and it is not on this list, please don't be offended. We picked 10 very interesting ones out of the many options. So with that out of the way, I hope you enjoyed the video. Starting off our list is the infamous Blue Flash. This is one of the most popular backyard roller coasters out there because it was the first to contain an inversion. The chain lift of this coaster brought a one-person car up the roof of a barn before going through a curved drop into a vertical loop and wrapping back around to the station. This coaster was built by John Ivers in Indiana, and a few people have ridden this coaster, including the one and only Taylor Bybee. Based off of his reviews, this coaster pulls 4.6 Gs, which is a very impressive number for any coaster, let alone something put together in a backyard. This coaster does look very janky. The car is a modified office chair, and the track looks oddly thin. However, this coaster is very safe and operated for 14 years before going defunct pretty recently. A fun fact about this coaster is that there's a 160-pound weight maximum, and that stems from the power of the chain lift and not the stability of the loop, so the track can definitely hold its ground. As many of you also know, Mr. Ivers has a second coaster called Blue 2, which was a smaller family coaster, but maybe we could talk more in depth about it in a different video. Next up is one of the most unique backyard coasters on the planet, Torque XLC. This coaster has a launch in it, and it actually isn't the only coaster on this list to have a launch. That still amazes me reading it off. How do people have the brainpower to build backyard coasters, let alone full-on launches? And these aren't like a dry tire slow roll launch. No, this is a real launch. There are even brake fins that stop the train from coming back. You probably have seen the footage. This is a full-on air compressed launch. That is where the name comes from, in memory of Hypersonic XLC. And the launch creates 1,000 pounds of force, which is bizarre seeing it sit in someone's backyard. Their website explains everything you need to know about the launch mechanism of this coaster and how they made it. It is a very interesting read, especially if you are super nerdy. My favorite part about all of this is that it has an operating panel. I don't know why I find that so cool, but there are a lot of other coasters on this list that have one. Up next is one of two coasters from Magictecture, and I have nothing but good things to say about them. They have made two coasters, both of which have made this list, but the one that we're going to talk about now is called Matterhorn Alpine Escape. This drew inspiration from the one and only Matterhorn at Disneyland Anaheim, and it looks insane for a backyard coaster. I can't believe I'm saying this, but there is theming on this coaster. I know, theming on a backyard coaster. That is crazy. And the theming doesn't even look cheap. There's a full-on mountain with snow, waterfalls, and such thrown in, an animatronic of a Yeti, and a really nice bridge. It is sick. The coaster itself looks like everything you would want in a backyard coaster. It uses a chain lift to go up, and something that is uncommon for this genre, it actually is a pretty long ride. It looks to ride smoother than the actual Matterhorn, which is really funny to think about. The only thing I have to point out is the clearance on this ride is insane. That is what you get when you don't have to put up with regulations. This coaster is absolutely the coolest thing ever, and their next coaster looks even better, but we'll get into that in a hot second. Next up is the Riley. This is a backyard coaster built by Gary for his grandchildren. It is oddly reminiscent of a mountain coaster and starts off its layout with a massive drop into an airtime hill, and then turns around before going back up a chain lift before dropping into a turnaround that leads you back to the start. This coaster looks very well put together. It looks to have some whip in it, especially on that first turnaround. I also love that the lift hill has anti-rollbacks, and the sounds that they make are extremely satisfying. It is almost as good as an aero lift hill sound. I think my favorite part about all of this is that he has made merch for this coaster, and I think it is a really cute idea. Overall, very cool coaster. Next up, you're going to look at a few wooden shuttle coasters. The first that we're going to talk about is Forest Rumbler. The coaster car and track on this ride just look like this is made by PTC. So this is a PTC backyard coaster in my books. The layout itself is pretty long and has a few airtime hills that probably don't get airtime, and a 90-degree turn. The jankiness comes into play when on the final ramp up, the coaster hits a tire to stop it from going off the track. It works, it saves room from having to build an even taller spike, but it is a little funny. I like how they painted the wood track green, it really tops everything off, and overall this looks to ride very well. Another wooden shuttle coaster is Shadow Striker. Now this coaster is pretty popular. A lot of big YouTubers have made the visit, including ElToroRyan and Coaster First. The whole coaster is put together by Built to Thrill, and they have done a great job with it. There's a small queue line and everything, so they really put the attention to detail in. I especially love that the S is on the side of the train. It looks really cool. This is a human power coaster, but it is no joke. The first airtime hill looks to give some insane negative Gs as well as some wicked laterals with the slant in it. It is by far the best part about this coaster, and that is not really up for debate. Following the airtime hill, it turns into a spike where it comes to a stop. This coaster really looks like a GCI Woody, and the track looks legit with multiple layers of wood and metal bracing. This is definitely one of the most well-built and presentable backyard coasters out there. Next up is a very interesting coaster that has an elevator lift. I know, right? It is crazy. My mind keeps on being blown by how creative and talented people are. This coaster is called Wild Mouse and uses an elevator lift to bring the coaster car up to the top of the layout. The layout itself is very generic, but the elevator is what makes it so unique. I don't think I could come remotely close to fitting in this car. It is definitely made for small children. The cool thing is there are legit brake pins before the elevator lift hill, and it could run multiple trains at once, something that no other coaster on this list can do. Next up is an interesting wooden coaster called Oklahoma Land Run. This is a very impressive wooden coaster, and the thing that it has going for it is that it's a long ride. The lift hill is absolutely massive. I would say like 20 feet tall, which is an impressive number to boast for a homemade ride. The crazy thing is, the whole entire turnaround is elevated that tall, so a lot of materials were put into it. The layout itself is super spread out and not really tight like some of these other coasters. There's a drop into a pretty big airtime hill, then a 180-degree turnaround back to the start of the lift. A lot of the track on this coaster sits on the ground, which is a little funny, but hey, if it works, it works. There's also a legit catwalk going around the turnaround in the lift hill, and the whole thing looks extremely well built. It looks like it rides pretty decent, and the airtime hill looks very good. The trains also look like mini PTC masterpieces, so props there for that. Next up is Jacko's coaster, and honestly, you can't even tell that this is a backyard coaster. I believe this is the only coaster on this list that can seat more than one person on a train, which is a pretty impressive mark to fulfill. This train can seat 4 riders in one car and uses racing seats in order to do so. The coaster starts with a 30-foot lift hill, making it the biggest coaster on this list, and then follows with basically a near vertical 40-foot drop with a near vertical pullout, making for one of the most wicked valleys I have ever seen. The layout follows with a lot of meandering, but it makes for a long ride. There's also a wicked head chopper that definitely wouldn't be legal in most places. I think the funniest thing about this coaster, and the one like jank element to it, is that in the POV of the ride, both times the operator hits something with a hammer to get the train going, and I just find that hilarious. This is probably the biggest coaster on this list and also the most well put together. It seems like something I would find at a fair, not in someone's backyard. The person who built this is well versed in manufacturing steel, so it makes sense that it passes off as professionally done. The last coaster we're going to talk about in this video is another masterpiece from Magictecture. If you could remember from 5 minutes ago, Magictecture does Disneyland recreations. We saw their Matterhorn inspired backyard coaster, and now we're going to take a look at their Big Thunder inspired backyard coaster called Little Thunder. Now, in my opinion, this is the coolest backyard coaster in the world because it has literally everything in it. The layout is super long. It starts out with a lift hill that brings the train through its first half. Then there's a small dark ride segment with an animatronic and some cool effects. And then there's a launch that brings the coaster through the second half of the layout. Now, having a chain lift and a launch in one coaster is pretty impressive, and I love this coaster for it. There's also a lot of theming with some rock work being done, and it's just really cool to see. And this coaster is absolutely massive. The station also feels legit with an operating panel and everything. It is really cool to see. I think the dark ride segment with the animatronic and the launch is enough to convince me that it is the coolest thing in the world, let alone having a complete layout from start to finish, and not even to mention the launch looks incredibly powerful. So those are 10 very unique backyard coasters. It amazes me how creative people are in the world and what you're able to achieve if you put your mind to it. Like launches, good forces, theming, and elevator lift. I can't believe these are all possible in people's backyards, and the rest of the world finds it impressive too, because it is some of the most viewed roller coaster content out there. So let me know if you like this video down in the comment section below. As always, make sure to like and subscribe, join the Discord, link in the description. I'll see you in the next one. Have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.